So excited to have Dr. Todd Lawson join us again for our special guest speaker series. This one is especially exciting for our Dawnbreaker students because they are actually part of this class, and we always like to open it up for the friends to take the opportunity to learn. So Dr. Todd Lawson has been with us for a couple of years now, and we appreciate his participation. Today's talk is going to be on the role and station of the letters of the living. I only ask that you save your questions for the end, and or you can also put them in the chat, and then we will answer them at the end. And if you have your microphones on, please go ahead and mute them at this time. Thank you so much. Whenever you're ready, Dr. Lawson.
Thank you, Nada. It's such a great pleasure and privilege to be a part of this super impressive series that you have been organizing now. I don't know for how long, but the talks that you arrange and host have enriched the intellectual and spiritual culture of the community immeasurably. And it's humbling to be invited to participate in light of the context and the history and development of this series, the Baha'i Chronicles. It's tremendous. So we all owe you much more than we could ever express or repay. I have a couple, I don't have a PowerPoint, friends. I have a couple of slides, I suppose, that I'll show when the time is right. They're not necessarily beautiful, but they have some quotations that are germane to my approach to this question of the role and station of the letters of the living. It's a terrific question. It was suggested by Paul Mantle, actually, a few weeks ago, and it's a great suggestion because in looking at and thinking about it, one is always oneself deepened a bit more in the question and the topic. There are resources out there online and elsewhere that can help us think about this question as well. The Baha'i Encyclopedia has a very nice article on the letters of the living, and there's a very good list of references at the bottom of that article that can send us to sources in English and Persian for contemplating the question. I'm going to approach it in my own way, which is to say that everything that we encounter that has to do with holiness and the divinity and the manifestation of divinity in the writings and in scripture in general, as a Baha'i principle, functions very much like a metaphor. It is meant to be read as symbolic of something greater than itself, or as a sign of something greater than itself. This term, letters of the living, is something that was created by the Bab. It's not, we don't see it really in previous scriptures or in the Quran, certainly, or in, it's possible that it exists in poetry and in mystical writings, but it has never been made prominent in the study of Islam, as far as I know. Its prominence coincides with the rise of the Bab's religion and teachings. However, before we start thinking of it as something utterly and completely new with regard to this particular question or subject in Baha'i studies, it's a good idea to refresh our memories about what the Guardian said in relationship to the rise and development of the Baha'i faith and the study of the Baha'i faith. So I want to share this first slide that I have with you, just to read it together with you, so that we'll, as it were, we'll all be on the same page, more or less. I'm hoping this will work. So here we are. Does that show up, people?
Yes.
Great. So this is my favorite quotation in the writings of the Guardian. It's the one that started me off on the study of Islam way back before the flood. And I never get tired of reading it or thinking about it. It's all very familiar to you folks here as well today, I'm sure, but let's just read it together to sort of revive its life in our own minds for the duration of our discussion today. As early as 1938, the Guardian, in advent of what later became known as Advent of Divine Justice, a letter, as you all know, that was sent to the Baha'i world, especially the Baha'is in the West, and postmarked December 25th, 1938, something of a Christmas present from the Guardian, said as follows, in the context of talking about how to mount a successful,
you need to go over there.
How to mount a successful teaching campaign. So one of the elements in successful teaching at that time was identified by the Guardian in the following words. They must strive to obtain from sources that are authoritative and unbiased a sound knowledge of the history and tenets of Islam, not of the Baha'i faith, oddly enough, of Islam, the source and background of their faith, right? And approach reverently and with a mind purged from preconceived ideas the study of the Quran, which, apart from the sacred scriptures of the Babi and Baha'i revelations, constitutes the only book which can be regarded as an absolutely authenticated repository of the Word of God. Now, they must devote special attention to the investigation of those institutions and circumstances. Circumstances is a wide category, obviously, but he uses it here. And circumstances that are directly connected with the origin and birth of their faith, with the station claimed by its forerunner, and with the laws revealed by its author. And this is page 49, Advent of Divine Justice, although I realize by using a page number, I date myself mercilessly. No one mentions pages anymore. So here we go. I want us to notice these things. And then the second writing that I want to share with you is from the Quran. And I'll have to share it this way. This is a very important verse in the Quran. As you know, the Quran states that every human community has received a divine revelation. Every community that has, every human community that has ever existed has received a messenger from God, what Baha'is would call a divine manifestation. And furthermore, this verse makes further precision and says, oh, and by the way, the number of prophets and messengers, what Baha'is would call divine manifestations, fixed by Islamic scholarship, inspired by the Quranic statement that every nation has received a manifestation, has been fixed at 124,000. So there are a number mentioned in the Quran, obviously, that we are familiar with and some not so familiar with, but the universalizing spirit of Islam maintains that there were thousands of these messengers sent to the world, to various communities. And of course, this has the ultimate effect and result of making it clear that, as a matter of fact, there's no such thing as chosen people. The entire human race has been chosen from day one until the present. So each community, this theoretical number of 124,000, has received a divine messenger. Now, here's the really important part for our discussion. We have sent no messenger save with the tongue of his people, that he might make all clear to them. God leads astray whomever he will and guides whomsoever he will, and he is almighty, all rise. So the key here is this statement: no messenger has been sent of those 124,000 manifestations, except that they've been able to speak the language of the people that they've been sent to. Now, I mention this because the term letters of the living is very much a part of the language of the time and place of the Bab. It is something that comes to us virtually out of left field, and something we have to deepen ourselves on to understand, yes, of course, what the Bab meant, but even more crucially, in a way, because this is in some ways more accessible, to try and understand what the people who heard this term understood when they heard it. This is an example of speaking to a community in their own language. Right? This isn't just words and grammar and syntax. These are the symbols and myths, if you like, the sacred beliefs and principles that a given community holds. That composes the language that these messengers of God come to a community with. All right. So, and then of course there are clues in the Bab's writings as well. We know that the term letters of the living was explained by him most explicitly in the Persian Bayan, which is a work that was written much later than the realization of this station of the letters of the living. It's one of his last works to be completed. And in there, he says that the letters of the living, which are numbered at 18, represent the reoccurrence of the Holy Spirit of the prophet, his daughter Fatima, who is also the wife of the Imam Ali, and the 12 and the remaining imams, plus 4 figures that came after the last imam that maintained a connection between the imams and the community. They're called 4 deputies sometimes in Arabic, and they're even called 4 gates in Arabic, depending on the sources. So there are these 18 people that represent the most sacred reality to the Bab's audience, the 12 Shi'i imams, who the Bab says have reappeared. So this is the first thing to understand when we look at the way the Bab himself speaks about the letters of the living. We understand, of course, that there are questions that arise because we have historical records that tell us who the names of the letters of the living are, and then throw us curveballs such as, well, this one sort of became inactive. This sort of dissolved off the scene and didn't really, was not an active letter of the living, as it were. So it brings a puzzle to our minds. I suggest that we try and avoid thinking about such questions for the moment and try to get the big picture that the Bab is communicating here. That is to say, the holiest connection with God has been resurrected on this day of resurrection. And these persons represent that event. that is what he says. And so how are these people understood as being the holiest beings in creation? Well, this is really what distinguishes Shi'i Islam from Sunni Islam. In Shi'i Islam, there was a refusal, in a sense, well, not in a sense, in reality, to accept that divine guidance could ever be cut off, as with the death of the Prophet Muhammad. So Shi'i Islam continued divine inspiration and divine guidance through the office of the imams. Later, Shi'i theology, in order to understand and to explain how this could possibly be, developed a very intricate and, yes, complicated theology and cosmology, a theory of the way in which the world was created and God created the world, which talked about the Holy Family, or as the Bab calls them in many places, the family of God, how they came to have their special status. Their special status is as the creative principle of the cosmos, as manifestations of the divine will. And it's very important to recall or to keep in mind how they're thought of. For example, and he's not the only one to think of them this way, but he's a teacher with whom we have a special relationship. Sheikh Ahmad Asai spoke of these 14 people. He didn't include the 4 gates or deputies in this statement, but he said that they are all actually the same. They have the same spirit. They have the same divinity. They have the same role. They are manifestations of what Christians might call the Logos. This sort of, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God mystery that we read in the Gospel of John. I think it's very useful to apply this statement to the role of the imams, the 14, sometimes they're called infallible, the 14 sinless, the 14 protected is what the word in Arabic actually means. The 14 ma'sum, they are protected from going astray. Whatever way we wish to translate that, they have a special status which distinguishes them from all other human beings at the time. They are principles, embodiments of God's creative power. So Sheikh Ahmad said it's as if they are a fire, and it's a fire that we see that has 14 flames. Each flame is distinct, but they are all united and all exactly the same by virtue of them being part of the same fire. This is a very beautiful simile or metaphor. So they were created by God according to the theology of what is called, sort of not very beautifully, 12er Shi'ism. That is to say, Shi'i Islam that recognizes 12 imams, which distinguishes it from the Ismailis, who recognize 7 imams, and the Zaydis, who recognize 5 imams. But this 12 imam Shi'ism is what is, as you know, what is the state religion of Iran today, where unfortunately, as we're learning, there's been a very terrible, catastrophic upsurge in the persecution of the Baha'i friends there for obvious political reasons. It's terrible. I hope we can close the session again with a prayer for the healing of the persecutors, please, and for the protection of the persecuted. So anyway, so the letters of the living represent, in the Bab's worldview, this revivification of this ancient, essential spiritual principle, and they are all participating in it. This is what the audience of the Bab would have understood, especially since the letters of the living were all followers of the Shaykhi school. They would have been very much in tune with the idea of this unity and this unity of status and function and role. Now, the question arises, of course, is, well, so are they all the same as the Bab? Obviously, that is not true. And nobody has ever been the same as the Bab. That you can put in the bank. The Bab was unbelievably creative and virtuosic in the way in which he communicated these divine secrets in a way that had never been done before or has been done since. His language of revelation is absolutely mind-boggling in the way in which it communicates things that you would not think possible to be communicated. No one else amongst the letters of the living, even though they are of the same spiritual fire, produced anything comparable to what the Bab wrote. There is no discussion about this. And in fact, excuse me, let me have a quick drink. And in fact, we can see the wisdom and the Bab's choice of this metaphor, the letters of the living. If we think about it a little more deeply, and look at what has frequently been brought into the discussion of the letters of the living, that is to say that they are, number one, they're the letters of the living, which is a divine attribute, Hay, Hayy, which means it's a Quranic divine attribute, which actually means the Guardian, I'm sure, would translate it as the ever living, the one that has no beginning and no end. The Guardian elsewhere in his prose, in his letters, refers to as the forces of life, for example. This is the symbol of life, which is, of course, sacred in Baha'i thought. That is one thing, because the abjad value of the word living in Arabic adds up to 18. But this is basically sort of the door into the mansion of what the letters of the living actually connote and denote through figuration and poetry and theology and philosophy. Because we understand it also to represent the letters of this very important phrase in the Quran, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, which has 19 letters. So, and as you know, the Bab himself recognized the 18 letters, the 17 men and one woman, Tahireh, and he himself esteemed himself as the 19th letter, making the first unity of the Babi revelation. So the number 19 emerges here again as something important. So what is so special about this 19th letter of the living? And here we'll be able to come to terms perhaps with on the one hand, this absolute spiritual equality, which is enshrined by the term letters of the living, or the Islamic logos, or the 14 infallible ones, together with the 4 gates or deputies of the early community before the greater occultation. There's that aspect, this non-negotiable reality. They all represent the same spiritual substance. But then we have this 19th letter, which complicates things. You know, and this is how you know you're still in touch with life, right? There's always something that makes you scratch your head and ask, well, if that, why this? And the beginning of an answer for this, understanding this, is that the 19th letter of the living can be construed as being the actual letter B, which is, of course, the first letter of the word Bab. And the letter B is the first letter of the word, of the phrase, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. I should have had, forgive me, I should have had a graphic here to explain this more clearly. But just so you know, the phrase, which is a phrase that the Bab says the letters of the living are the individual letters of, is in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, or in Arabic, Bismillahir Rahman Rahim. So the first letter is the B, and the B, which stands for the Bab, paradoxically the 19th letter, but actually the first, is interesting because it is a vehicle for this all-important word and concept that we encounter also in the writings everywhere, the idea of the point, right? The point, because the letter B in Arabic is written like a C on its side with a point underneath it, right? And this point has a special life of its own in Islamic thought and in Islamic philosophy and mystical philosophy, beginning with this famous statement from the Imam Ali, who said that the Quran contains all the knowledge of all the religions that ever existed. And all of the knowledge of all the religions that ever existed exist in the very first chapter of the Quran, which is called the opener, or the overture, if you like, the Fatiha. It's a prayer that's said millions of times every day around the world. Praise be to God, the merciful, the compassionate, Lord of the day of judgment, and so on. It's the thing that opens up the Quran. That's why it's called the opener. It has 7 verses, and it's much loved by the Islamic world. The Bab himself wrote a commentary on it, separate commentary, and its words and vocabulary suffuse the writings not only of the Bab, but also of Baha'u'llah as well. The straight path, the merciful, the compassionate, those who are led astray, and so on. So Ali said all of the knowledge of all the scriptures of all humanity, presumably those 124,000 manifestations that we talked about earlier, is in the Quran. All of the knowledge of the Quran is in this opening surah, the Fatiha, the opener. Fatiha means opener. And all of the knowledge is in the Fatiha is in the verse, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, which in Arabic is called the Basmala. So everything that's said in Arabic scripture rhymes. This is just something, and we lose the rhyme when we translate it, but that's okay. So everything that's in the Fatiha is in the Basmala, and everything that's in the Basmala is in the very first letter, that B. And everything that's in that first letter, that B, is in the point under the B, the dot under the B. And then Ali said, and I am that point, all right, with obvious infinite implications and connotations and meanings. So this is a very well-known, much loved hadith, not just by Shi'i Muslims, but by Muslims in general. And it's very famous. No one doubts its authenticity seriously. Even if they doubt its authenticity, they pray that it's really authentic, okay? So because it's so beautiful. All right, so and later on, Ali was killed in 661. In the meantime, Islamic thought and philosophy and mysticism develop in various stages throughout Islamic history. And all that development is something that the letters of the living would have inherited. You know, these letters of the living were very accomplished scholars and deeply learned in the hadith and the Quran and the writings of the philosophers of Islam, and of course Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Khadem, but they all had absorbed this very, very rich intellectual tradition. So they also knew that Ibn Arabi, one of the greatest mystics who ever lived, in his voluminous writings, designated this point that's under the letter B as a principle of life that circulates through the entire cosmos, through all created things. The point is a sacred emblem of the unknowableness of God and the appearance of God. It's the tiniest thing that we can think of, and it indicates the largest thing that can be thought of. It just has all of these connotations and sort of intellectual reverberations. The Bab also claims to be the point, not only for these cosmological reasons, but because in Baha'i parlance, and I think it probably represents something, a way of speaking in the learned culture of the time, to refer to somebody as the point of something, like the point Nuqtatul Kaf, for example, as being, or the point of the Bayan, which the Bab refers to himself as, or the point of the Quran, which the Bab refers to Muhammad as being, means that they're the author of something. It's a little more down to earth. It means that they are the point from which the book that we're talking about flowed, just as the point of ink on a page is that from which any other composition flows. It's the first gesture in writing a book. So the Bab claims to be the point of the Bayan. That means he is the source of the Bayan. But this nukta al-ula in Arabic, which means the primal point, actually refers to something beyond literary activity. It refers to this principle once again as being that from which creation proceeded. Why is that? That is because the Baha'i faith is all about unity, and all about the unity of religion, the unity of God, and the unity of humanity. Yes, we know that. And that's something that we need to teach and need to deepen ourselves about all the time. But one of the things that it does that is not always noticed in our deepenings is that the Baha'i faith had, to a remarkable degree, insists that God is utterly and forever unknowable. In the language of the professors, this is called apophatic theology. And it's quite distinctive. Not as an idea or a philosophy, because many religions also claim this type of theology as well. But the vehemence with which the Baha'i teachings insist upon the unknowableness of God is distinctive and remarkable. There have been other groups in history that have done the same with similar intensity. What is the reason for this? Why is this so important? Why is it so distinctive? Well, while we're thinking about trying to come up with an answer to that somewhat impossible question, what it does say is that God is therefore even beyond such comparatively lame ideas as even being or even non-being. This is why we started out today, or I started out today, talking about how these symbols and terms that we encounter in the faith, in the writings, frequently end up having this metaphorical spiritual energy in which the word is there and may or may not relate to something familiar, but the usage that we encounter it in the writings sends us far, far away from our default sort of response to the word. The letters of the living, their role and their function is to assert this unknowableness of God, to assert that the divine creative energy has once again, with great force, come to humanity. And in light of the Bab's vision, is making all things new in a way that could not have been predicted by anyone. The energy of creativity, of newness, of beauty, of a new beginning, of the sacredness of the idea of change. These are all things that the Bab talks about from the very beginning in the Qayyum al-Asma. These are things that the letters of the living were charged by him to take forth into the world. And by being the very first group of Babis, we begin to develop another type of appreciation for this role and function of this office of letters of the living. And we know that we're pretty sure that the letters of the living were not given any particular authority by the Bab or any particular office, no powers of any particular sacerdotal powers of any type or powers of interpretation. But they were to live the life of this new event in history and to communicate it to the rest of the members of the alphabet, the human beings in their travels and in their journeys. So it might be a good time to just take a break here. I'll have a drink of tea, and if there are questions, God help me, pray that I'll be able to answer them.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. Thank you so much, Dr. Lawson. I love the way you especially broke it down by saying that the point in layman's term can also be looked at as the source, the author, and I think a lot of people appreciate that. If there are any questions, please go ahead and use the raise your hand feature or the chat, and we will end with a Persian chant for the Baha'is in Iran as suggested by Dr. Lawson, for our brothers and sisters who have been imprisoned and their homes destroyed. We will end with that, and there will be we'll just end right at that. So questions, let's see. Afsana, please unmute yourself for your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lawson. My question is, you said that the God is utterly unknowable to us humans. Are the station of the imams and the letters of the living are the same as us, or do they have more knowledge about God and its qualities?
Thank you, Afsane. Well, they have more knowledge. As a matter of fact, the imams, these 14 protected beings, by the time of Sheikh Ahmad, it had become commonplace in Shi'i mystical and theological circles and logical and philosophical circles to call the imams precisely mazahir, manifestations, divine exactly the same word that we use to describe the station of Baha'u'llah and the Bab. Just before the Bab made his claim, and after, even today, amongst Shi'i Muslims and philosophers and mystics, these imams are considered divine manifestations. So that means, as we know, that means something very special, a qualitative difference. It's almost as if the manifestation is a different species, not quite human being. And this is manifested or made clear in their wisdom and their vision and their writings and the way in which they can describe the illness of society and prescribe the cure, right? No, absolutely. In short, they know much more about God than the average human being. Yes. But even they, as you know, frequently say, in the face of the divine being or essence or reality, they are absolutely ignorant and unable to express or explain the inner workings or the details or the complexities of things. But their light is definitely brighter than the rest of ours.
Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm so happy this is going to be recorded because there's so much information, especially about the numbers and the numerology and everything that's really, really, I'm going to have to go back and review it. But as a person from a Christian background and who's someone who will be talking to Christians, how would we compare the letters of the living to the apostles of Christ? So how do you see that relationship?
Thanks, Catherine. Good to see you again, by the way. Well, I think that analogy with the Gospel of John is very useful. And I think that they are like the apostles of Christ, but they're sort of apostles of Christ extra or somehow energized because they are of the same substance as the manifestation, shading off to a little less intensity, if you like. You know, in geography, there are no straight lines, right? But us human beings, when we want to designate a piece of property that we own, we hire a surveyor and we draw straight lines around it. Or when people invade countries, they draw straight lines to say, this is us and that's you, and so on. In the world of the spirit, we don't have this. It's more like the rainbow. We know there's a difference between violet and red, but we don't exactly know where that change takes place. If you look at the rainbow all week long, you can't really say it's exactly there where it happens. It happens, right? It's the same story, I believe, with these effusions of the Spirit, the divine Spirit. But a very useful analogy is that Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Because a letter is sort of a miniature word, right? And so it's the same sort of logocentric view of things, or using the alphabet as a metaphor for divine things. I'm sorry that I really apologize, Catherine and everybody else. I should have tried to put together a PowerPoint.
Thank you so much. Leighton, please unmute yourself.
Two very tiny points. The first one is a clarification. Now, could you just clarify the number of messengers? Is it 6 figures or 5 figures? That's number one. And number two, would you say that here we are in the Baha'i era of 179, that we are still too close to appreciate this new dispensation, let alone to grasp all about the faith?
Thank you, Leighton. I don't think we've met before, frankly.
No, we haven't. Not person to person, maybe electronically, but not physically.
Well, even electronically, I think I would have remembered, but it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for your questions. And the idea of, first, let's take the easy question, the one about 6 figures or 5 figures. What is that again?
Yeah, you said 1,000 messengers, 1,240,000?
Oh, 124,000.
So it's
124,000, 6 figures.
6 figures.
1, 2, 4, comma, 0, 0, 0. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. And yes, of course, we're too close to understand. And even if we weren't too close, this understanding game goes on forever. It continues forever and ever and ever. One of the major themes of the Quran, and we see this in our own writings, is that the Quran is full of admonitions and commandments for people to think about things, to think about the way the universe is constructed, to ponder, to meditate upon. This is one of the things that human beings are supposed to do. And so it's no accident that the Baha'is have inherited this veneration of mental activity, to ponder, to consider, to think, and to meditate. So yes, we can endlessly meditate on the significance of all of these things and try to come to a perfect understanding. I think what the wise man said, a conclusion is a place where you get tired of thinking. I think this is something to bear in mind.
And just as a follow-up, also because we have been wrongly taught, there were no interpreters, there was no one to explain what the prophet said. We were wrongly taught as Christians, and we were wrongly taught even in Islam, that we have to think of all the things that we thought we knew, and see everything with a new eye, because in this dispensation we have people to explain things to us and for us, what the messenger said.
Well, yes, I think that's very true. Something that I haven't said yet, I would like to just take a quick second, Neda, if I have the time, to say that another takeaway, if you like, from this symbol of the letters of the living, this station of the letters of the living, is an emphasis on a way to understand unity. We are very fond of referring to monotheism as being the greatest form of religion. But I think it's asking us to consider the idea of monotheism rather than thinking about the singleness of God, because, if we look at the Quran seriously and think about it the way the Muslim mystics did, we come to the conclusion that we can't even say that God is one, because that puts God in a box. which is a violation of the law of divine transcendence, because we're inflicting our notion of oneness on God. But what we can say is that whatever God is, this being beyond being and beyond non-being that we can never really know about, truly is that as a result of this wondrous creative power, which is what the word Baha'i means, the Baha'i calendar and Baha'i and so on. This is a word that the Bab loved. It's incredible the way he uses it. It's everywhere. It means new, original, beautiful, creative. It's almost a synonym for the word Baha in the Bab's writings, Baha'i. What it means, what Tawheed means, or this idea of unity as expressed in the late antique period of the Quran, is an insistence, as we see in the idea of the 124,000 prophets, an insistence that all things are deeply, profoundly, and intimately connected. And this is what the symbol and emblem of the alphabet also says, that they're all these letters are made from the same ink, and each letter, all the letters are susceptible of being rearranged to construe and express meaning, but it's all one creation, and there's this unbreakable bond that we are a part of as humans.
Okay, our final question, Eric, and then we will have our closing prayer. Eric, please.
Well, thank you very much, Nida June, and Dr. Lawson. Amazing. I'm also happy to have access to the recording because it was very rich. I really love the connections you make for us here. It's quite unique in your own very much style. So it's actually a good segue what you just shared now in terms of divine unity and everything to be deeply connected. And if I could have your thoughts on it's relevant to the conference of Badasht, when His Holiness Baha'u'llah basically was conferred new names for the believers, and subsequently His Holiness the Bab used those names without actually having had the conversation with His Holiness Baha'u'llah.
Well, thanks. Could you come up with a question that's challenging, please?
I don't know if I have the chance to get you here. So.
I can't say too much about this. I'm sorry to say. It's a very interesting question, but I don't really have a key to a decent answer for you. There is a little bit of controversy in the writings and in the historians of the faith, even about how these names came about for Qudus and so on. So we need more people to study these things and to work on them. But very briefly, this spirit of what I used this word Badi'at earlier, B-A-D-I with an accent and a raised C at the end for the Ain. This is a word that is at this beating heart of the Bab's revelation. And the way he uses that word indicates that we are to look at everything that we are familiar with this new creative, originating, wondrous, new beginning, avant-garde energy. It is true, therefore, to think of the Babi phenomenon, the Babs, as a gesture of modernity in Iran in the mid-19th century, of serious change. Yeah. So from that point of view, every name is made new, even if it appears to be the same.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so once again, thank you so much, Dr. Lawson. Truly appreciate it. And this will be recorded, and we will close with a prayer in Farsi for our brothers and sisters who are being imprisoned and in Iran. Thank you.
Thank you, us. Thank you very much, Neda.
الله اکبر. ای متوجه الله، چشم از جمیع سوا بربند و به ملکوت ابها برگشای. آنچه خواهی از او خواه و آنچه طلبی از او طلب. به نظری 100,000 حاجات روا نماید و به التفاتی 100,000 درد بی درمان دوا کند و به انعطافی زخم‌ها را مرهم نهد و به نگاهی دلها را از قید غم برهاند. آنچه کند او کند، ما چه توانیم کرد؟ یفعل ما یشاء و یحکم ما یرید است. پس سر تسلیم نه و توکل بر رب رحیم به و البها علیک عبدالبها.